Buenas tardes, everyone. My name is Alejandro Mendíaz Rivera, and I'm the Associate Director at El Centro de la Raza at the University of New Mexico. Go Lobos.
Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel Torres Chaparro. I use he, him pronouns. I go by Dani, and I'm a Student Success Specialist Senior with El Centro de la Raza. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today.
All right, cool. We do have our presentation. So before we start, I just want to give a legal disclaimer. This information that we're going to be providing to you all is not meant to be legal advice, and it is current as of Tuesday, September 23rd, because that's when we put the presentation together, right? This is a very rapidly evolving topic in today's climate, so we just wanted to put that out there for legal reasons.
Alrighty, y'all, just so we can get started, we're going to be going over a few, some terms, some terminology. And so first off, we have undocumented. And so the word undocumented refers to any individual that does not have a permanent residency or citizenship. They don't count with a social security. And so that could be anybody. And truly, it does encompass a wide range of the students that we see. And so going on to the next one, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, also colloquially known as DACA, was a executive order that was implemented by President Obama in, I believe, 2012, that granted students, young folks that were brought from another country to the U.S. Work authorization. And so it has deportation protections as well as the ability to work. However, this work permit is only available for 2 years. So every 2 years, individuals that are beneficiaries of this program have to continue reapplying in order to be able to continue working. And so just a quick disclaimer in terms of the current state of DACA. DACA right now is in a position where the state of Texas doesn't necessarily take any new applications. And it's in this weird limbo where we don't necessarily know what is going to be happening. As of right now, what I understand and what Alejandro also understands is the fact that they are receiving new applications based on court proceedings. However, we don't necessarily know if they are processing applications at this time. So just something to know, a lot of students right now that may be undocumented within the K through 12 system are not eligible to apply for that particular reason. Alrighty, so going on to the next term, mixed status families. This refers to a family that is composed of members with different types of immigration statuses. So a perfect example of this could be parents are undocumented, sibling has DACA, and there's another sibling that has citizenship. And so it is a family that's composed of different types of immigration statuses. And it is a bit complex sometimes, but it is the reality that we see within the students that we serve at El Centro de la Raza. Next one, we have legal permanent residents, also known as a green card holder. These are individuals that are in the process of gaining their citizenship, so they have a protection, they're a legal permanent resident. Individuals within this classification do receive federal funds, and they're able to apply for the FAFSA. The next one, we kind of compiled all these different entities together. We have Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Custom and Border Patrol, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and Homeland Security Investigations. These are all just federal agencies that fall under this colloquial term that we know as La Migra. And so they all have different functions within the department. They all do different things, but we in our communities know them as La Migra. So we like to mention that. And then lastly, we have individual taxpayer identification number, or an ITIN number. This number is to be able to, submit taxes. And so you are able to process your taxes with this ITIN number. It acts very similarly to a social security number, but it doesn't provide you with, the same benefits as a social security number.
It's the federal government saying, we know you're here, we know you're undocumented, you have to pay taxes anyway. Shocking, undocumented people pay taxes. So we want to talk a little bit more about undocumented students, right? Danny mentioned that currently a lot of our students, whether in the K through 12 system, but also in higher ed, don't qualify for DACA unless they're non-traditional students due to the legal challenges being faced at the federal level, which are unresolved. But we want to emphasize the fact that we use the word undocumented, not the word illegal. I want to mention that being undocumented in this country is not a crime. It is a civil offense, and most immigrants come into the country with a visa and then overstay their visa and then become undocumented, right? Not all of us cross through the desert or through the river, right? There's people who unfortunately have to do that, but that's not the reality for the majority of us. And even if we do that, right, if I had crossed the Rio Grande and came in without inspection, that is a minor misdemeanor. It is not a felony offense or anything like that. And so that's why we don't use the word illegal. And even if it was an illegal act, right, if you speed like our boss always says that she does, right, that does not make her illegal just because she is speeding, right? And so I do want to be very clear about why we use the word undocumented, not illegal. I also want to say that, undocumented students are trying to get their education. A lot of us were brought here because our families wanted us to have a better opportunity at life. And so about 120,000 students get their high school diploma or equivalency every year. And according to the President's Alliance on Education, Higher Education, there's about 400,000 students enrolled in US colleges and universities. That's a lot. And so, who are undocumented folks? We're just regular folks trying to get an education, trying to get ahead in life. And a lot of us didn't have a choice to be undocumented, right? I was brought here when I was 8 years old, came in with the visitor's visa, overstayed that visa, and then I became undocumented at the age of 10. I have since been able to become a citizen, but all of those years that I was not, I didn't have a pathway. I was a DACA recipient that didn't provide a path either. And so it takes a long time and a lot of money to be able to adjust that. I also want to say that people tend to lump in undocumented folks as all being Latino or all being Mexicanos, right? I think Latinos and Mexicanos particularly are very outspoken and a little bit more unafraid to say their status. In other cultures, right, Asian cultures, some Eastern European cultures, it's a little bit more hush-hush. Like I've worked with some Middle Eastern students who are extremely afraid to disclose their documentation status. And so I think, there's a little bit more of us Latinos that are undocumented, and we're a little bit more outspoken about it, but we are not, a single community in terms of our nationalities. In terms of like being on campus, whether it's K through 12 or at the university level, undocumented folks are involved at all levels, right? In student government and student organizations, doing amazing things. And so we are a part of that campus community. And then I also want to say that undocumented students are federally guaranteed a K through 12 education. And so whether or not you agree with somebody being undocumented in this country, it is your job by law to serve them.
Alrighty, y'all. Now we're transitioning a little bit over to Senate Bill 582. Many of you may know this particular law, but it was established in 2005. And what it guarantees any individual that graduates within a high school here in the state of New Mexico and has resided within New Mexico for at least a year in the educational system is guaranteed federal aid, state aid, regardless of their immigration status. And so, the criteria, as you can see here, this is literally the law as it's written. It's really short and it's easy to interpret. And so different institutions interpret this a little bit differently. And we're going to be going a little bit over how UNM actually interprets this particular law.
So UNM created a state aid application based off of Senate Bill 582. And when I say UNM, like the president didn't just wake up one day and was like, oh, this should happen, right? It was through years of advocacy and through amazing partners in our financial aid office, including Victoria Padilla, who's sitting right here. But this was made to make the process a little bit simpler. And so if you work for a higher ed institution, or if your students go to a higher ed institution that doesn't have a state aid form, separate than like doing a paper FAFSA, I encourage you to advocate for that. And so at UNM, what are the differences, right? Like FAFSA is the same across, right? And we should all know this, right? FAFSA is available for US citizens, LPRs, and certain eligible non-citizens. If you have a student that you think may be an eligible non-citizen, please read all the fine print. It's really difficult to qualify. If you have doubts, please reach out to a college's financial aid office and they can help you figure out if that student has the correct documentation or not. And so of course, you know what benefits come from it, but at UNM, we offer state aid to Senate Bill 582 eligible students who also meet some of those same income guidelines. And so basically what our financial aid office did is they replicated that formula and they said, all right, cool, let's be equitable here. Of course, there's not as much state aid available as say like a Pell Grant, for example. Also students who don't have work permits, they can't qualify for state work study, unfortunately. But UNM has come a long way in being able to make education a little bit more affordable for students who otherwise can't work legally, who can't receive federal benefits of any sort, not just federal financial aid. And so that's a little bit about what we do at UNM.
Perfect. So that transitions us over to what we can do to be better allies for our undocumented students and families that fall into this category. So they contribute to a sense of community, care, and safety. Refrain from using or spreading misinformation. Right now, I think we're in a moment in time, right now in terms of the political climate, where we're seeing a lot of sensitized things online. We're seeing videos and we see a lot of heightened emotions. And I think our first immediate response is to be able to share everything that we see. Sometimes it may be doing a little bit more harm than good because we don't necessarily know how we can actually verify that this information is correct. And so that's what we mean by that particular point, is just seeing if we can make sure that the information is accurate and try to stop the spread of misinformation. Educate yourself of resources available to undocumented students and share them with students, families, colleagues. And I think this is something that we tend to see a lot within UNM, within the work that we do, is we have a pretty great network with different advising offices and different partners on campus, and that warm exchange, that warm handoff from those departments to ours is crucial, especially whenever you are helping, assisting undocumented students, because there is a big fear around being undocumented and having folks not necessarily understand the status that you fall into. And so that warm handoff, building that rapport, that trust is extremely important for students. And then lastly here, if any undocumented students comes out to you, respectfully acknowledge their experience, even if you don't necessarily agree with it. I think it's important to be able to highlight and acknowledge somebody's lived experience, just because, like I mentioned earlier, it is a really touchy subject, something that our communities live in fear of, and so it's important to be able to acknowledge the fact that they did this courageous thing and being vulnerable with you, but also I think it's important to not necessarily emphasize it too much or make comments around like, thank you so much, that might be so hard. I think making comments along the lines of like, your experience is extremely difficult, I think adds a little bit more of that stress and uncertainty for them. It is an experience that we all do experience, but at the same time, it's like it's not a good thing to have that constant reminder that it is hard to be undocumented. So
we already know. Yeah. Yeah, and so the best response that you can give to you when somebody tells you is, thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. And then treat them as you would anybody else, understanding some of the limitations placed around that. So what else can we do, right? We can work to remove systemic barriers, right? I mentioned working with our UNM Financial Aid Office to create the UNM State Aid application so that students wouldn't have to fill out a paper FAFSA, which asked for a social security number and said federal on it, right? That caused a lot of fear for our families. We also worked with the UNM admissions office several years back to include I do not have a social security option on the UNM admissions application. And so I invite you all to review the policies at your offices, your institutions, and think about, why do we need these things, right? Why do we have these rules? How can we make it easier, not just for undocumented students, but for all students to get through some of these processes? I always like to tell my students, half the job of graduating from UNM is going to class and getting good grades. The other half is figuring out the system. It shouldn't be that way. And so if you're in a position where you control funding or where you can advocate for where your institution's funds are going, I invite you to advocate to be creative with your state and institutional funds so that they can go to serving all students regardless of their documentation status. Also understanding limitations for undocumented students, right? The Real ID Act kicked in, and undocumented folks who don't have like DACA or anything else, right? They can't fly at the moment. And so, you know, what does that do for students who want to participate in sports teams, right? Arizona and Texas have passed extremely hostile anti-immigrant laws, as Danny was mentioning earlier, right? What does that do for if you want to take your students to a conference in one of these states? And so you have to kind of think about those things. And last but not least, making yourself visible as an ally goes a long way, right? I was told at UNM so many times that I didn't belong there because I was undocumented. And so I started to look for little clues, right? If you have a sticker of a monarch butterfly or of a poster that says no human being is illegal, that's immediately going to ease your students' anxiety about having to tell you or disclose their documentation status. We added this slide in here because a lot of people ask us, like, what do we do if federal agents or law enforcement comes to our office and we have somebody, a student that's undocumented or a coworker who's afraid because they're undocumented, right, or have DACA. And so please review this slide, but just know that according to the National Immigrant Law Center, right, you can treat law enforcement like a vampire. They can't come in unless you invite them, unless they have a signed valid judicial warrant, which is actually the next slide.
Yeah, so here I don't necessarily think y'all can see exactly the details, but the main difference is the judicial warrant is actually administered by a judge, and you can see the actual signature towards the bottom. The other warrant that you see there is actually by ICE, and so it is administered by their office, and so the main difference is the top section and then the signature. You can see this a little bit more in detail. We are going to be sharing these slides as well, and so once they're posted, you can kind of see it a little bit more clearly. There we go, sorry.
And again, just for your information, we do have some of the main resources that we access. This does include a UNM specific one, but there are also local resources, national resources, state resources, and then our very own Undocumented Resources tab for El Centro. By the way, if folks don't know what El Centro is, we are a student resource center at the University of New Mexico. We were established in 1969 for students, by students, and we do a little bit of everything from helping students with admissions, with their FAFSAs, which is why we come to the training, with scholarships, and then once they're at UNM, we provide co-curricular programs as well as cultural and educational workshops, and everybody is welcome at El Centro. You don't have to speak Spanish, you don't have to be Hispanic. We serve a lot of in-state students, a lot of international students as well. So that's a little bit about us. We do have a couple of minutes for questions, but we did want to address a couple that we get very often. Right now, a lot of our mixed status families have fears, right? So you could have a student whose parents are undocumented, but that student is a citizen. And so we get the question, should we apply to FAFSA? That's not a decision for us to make. Before, we could tell students, agencies don't share data, right? But we see right now that the federal government is asking, for example, the IRS to share data on who is undocumented and who is not. So we can now, with any certainty, tell our students or our families that they are going to be safe if their parents are documented and they apply to FAFSA. That's a decision that they have to make on their own or with the consultation of their lawyers.
Next one, just wanted to make this point evident, is the fact that DACA recipients as well as undocumented students do not qualify for federal aid. And so DACA is, like I mentioned earlier, a work authorization program. It doesn't provide any sense of a pathway to citizenship. And so by default, their recipients of this do not qualify for federal aid. But it's different based on the state, so they do qualify for state aid, but it varies depending on the state that the student lives in.
Next, I mentioned that UNM has a state aid application. Again, I want to mention not all institutions across New Mexico do, so please don't go to NMSU and be like, well, El Centro told me you had this for undocumented students. So if your students want to go somewhere other than UNM, please check in with them. I do want to give a shout out to SFCC. I know I saw somebody from SFCC here because we modeled ours after theirs. So go SFCC.
Yeah. Another one